Tom, I'd like to talk to you a bit about working with David Maloney. I remember we had some wonderful times together. And what was it that you particularly liked about David's?
Well, what I liked about him is that he admired me greatly, and that reassured me a lot. He thought I was rather special. But then, of course, I discovered subsequently he did that to everyone. That was part of his great genius. But he was just so jolly, wasn't he, to be with, and inspired this kind of loyalty and affection. And he was so kind. I'll give you an example. One day we had an actor in a scene, and he only had about 2 or 3 lines. It was his very first job. And so David said, I want you, Charlie, in this scene, I want you to be standing. And so I said, look, just a minute, before we go any further, where are the cameras? And I thought to myself, when he said that, his first job, I thought, you know, he was up for the slaughter. And David Maloney, instead of slaughtering him, he said, where would you like them to be? and the boy said, well, I don't really know. And David said, well, I think they'd be about here, if that's all right with you. He said, yeah, that's okay. And it was diffused. And I met this boy later. I persuaded David to, not without difficulty, to give him 3 more lines. I met him years later at the National, and he recounted this story and said, you were kind to me, but he said, David Maloney was amazing. He must tell that story, you know. Yeah, where's the camera before you begin?
And can you remember anything about the actual rehearsals of Talons of Weng-Chiang? Do you remember Deep Roy?
Yes, Little Deep Roy. But we loved it because it was, curiously enough, Doctor Who lends itself to going back in time. When we say go back in time, everyone knows something about Victorian times, you know, fog and hansom cabs and all that paraphernalia of thousands of melodramas and Sherlock Holmes and all the rest of it. And so the costumes that they designed for us moved into the Sherlock Holmes period. It was dazzling costumes, weren't they? Yeah, they were. I remember we had some problem when I had to go down a grid in St. Catherine's Dock, and with the overcoat on, I wouldn't fit down the grid. And David said, I wonder, could we make the grid bigger? But that would be very difficult. So I think I took my coat off for that. Or maybe I got in, and then they put the coat on, and I stuck my head out. It was just joy. And when I'm still in touch with his daughter, who saved my life, but that's another story.
This is David's daughter.
David's daughter saved my life when she was only about 8 or 9 years old when we were all in Italy on holiday together. And she sends me emails. He was adored by his family, yes, absolutely adored. To be with him made you feel better. He went on to big things, didn't he, at the BBC? Blake Seven.
Oh, yeah.
He did lots of other things after that.
I remember I used to come down for what was known as the producer's run. So after you'd rehearsed it for a week, there'd be a technical run.
That's right, yeah.
And a producer's run. And you would be, the studio floor was marked out, and you would be, so to mark out where the sets were. But it was all pretend.
Yeah, yeah.
But David suddenly became very mock officious then, and everything had to be going, and there was this sort of humour. I used to laugh every time I came to a producer's run of one of David Maloney's shows, because he was catching everybody out. He was calling the cues a little bit ahead of when the actors were used to them, just to get everybody on their toes.
But he told, and you related the story, I think, once before. What about the times? You know the story about when he was a young PA. Was he a PA? Yeah,
with William Hartnell.
When he was calling the shots he was calling the camera to roll for the director.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I think so.
And what did he say?
Well, I think you either said roll cameras or turn over.
That's right.
Those were the sort of Hollywood language.
Right. Yeah.
And on his first job as a production assistant, he said roll over. And everybody rolled over. He used to tell that story against himself.
He did, yeah. And we're still rolling over about the whole idea of it. And he told another one about, it was on a Doctor Who, I think, and they'd set up an explosion. I've forgotten the guy's name. He had a double-barrel name. And anyway, we had to stop for lunch. It was going to be the very first shot. And the guy, that might be my agent. Just a minute. No, it isn't my agent, no. It isn't my agent. Anyway, David said to the special effects guy, so listen, first shot after lunch, and we're going to blow that tree up. And the guy said, don't worry, David. All I have to do is just wait. And the tree blew up. The guy was waiting down there by the tree. And he blew it up before lunch when the camera wasn't working. The guy was down there waiting. He said, when I wait, blow the tree up.
And he blew it up.
He blew it up.
God, I don't remember
So
that.
they had to, it took another hour and a half
To rig it.
To rig another tree. I mean, it was a BBC tree, so no one was hurt. A BBC tree.
Do you remember, Tom, on the night shoot down in Wapping? It was really, really cold, and we had to dress that cobbled street down by the Angel pub, and that's where the carriage came.
Yeah, I remember all that. I was, of course, I was well wrapped
river.
up. I was well wrapped up, but it was very dramatic. And people like those difficult, hard nights, especially if you're bonded. Of course, if the places, if the actors don't like each other or they hate the director, then it's miserable. But we liked it a lot. And of course, it was we had a subject of conversation with the St. Catherine's Dock, that new development, luxury development. We talked about that, about what it must be like to be rich, you know. And then, of course, I spent quite a lot of time in that marvelous life looking at Louise Jameson's legs. I mean, she's got wonderful legs.
Her legs were out for a lot of the time.
Her legs were out for a lot
Although
of the time.
she was in knickerbockers as well.
Yeah, but I'd seen her legs, you know, without that. And I was thinking about Janus Thorns. And, of course...
The Face of Evil outfit, yeah.
I was obsessed with Louise's leg because, of course, I'd never seen Sarah Jane's legs. Because Sarah Jane was always so modestly dressed.
None of us ever saw her.
No, that's right. And
Wasn't allowed.
Liz, that's right. Liz used to laugh about that, yeah. But it was a wonderful time. And you see, there were some marvellous people in there because Trevor and Christopher Benjamin and people like that, were they on that night shoot?
I don't know if they were on the night shoot, but they were
around
for quite a lot.
Yes. It was lovely, but it was cold. And it was marvellous, and we knew we were enjoying the script. You know, we knew that.
Yeah, we'd got off to a good start.
We had.
But I remember there was a bit of something not right on this between you and Louise.
Well, there was actually. It was funny. Louise and I have become very friendly over the years, and she was reminding me not all that long ago that I was very cold towards her, and I think. And I do remember feeling rather aloof and not being able to make head nor tail of it, and not being as friendly as I had been with Elizabeth. But it wasn't that I meant. Maybe you see, maybe I was covering up for a kind of unexpressed desire. You know, that when you can't have something, you think, yeah, well, shrugs. Yeah, she's okay. Maybe because she wasn't very impressed by me. That I was pretending I wasn't impressed by her when I was terribly impressed by her.
And moving on to the Northampton, do you remember the Northampton Theatre with all that sort of... We shot on video cameras, but they were mini cameras, weren't they? And there was all that stuff in the flies,
that's
falling
right.
down on the...
Yes, it was. I remember, but also I do remember, of course, entering into this kind of... it was a C.J. Phipps theatre, beautifully designed. He was a great 19th century. He designed Her Majesty's Theatre. It's a very historic theatre. But I remember being so comfortable with Trevor and Christopher. You know, Christopher, who is a marvellous comedy actor. No one can do that kind of bluff comedy. Yeah. He was a wonderful, wonderful Julius Caesar at the RSC. And I was very comfortable with those chaps. You know, we were telling stories. Actors are always talking about other actors, aren't they?
I think because we were away together on filming for a few days, there was more opportunity to bond like that. Because in those days, there wasn't much filming on drama, and there was very little filming on our show. Yeah. You would bond in the rehearsal room. But this was like you'd been let out of school.
Yeah, that's right.
You were off and, having fun.
Yeah, and we were about the same age, Trevor and Christopher and me. I think about the same age. Maybe I was a bit older than them, but we were like boys together. And do you know, I have never seen, it's an extraordinary thing in the small world of acting. I never saw him again. I mean, I've seen them acting, but I never met them again. That's incredible, isn't it? That so many people... Of course, I used to get very anxious because sometimes people, of course, who'd worked with me disappeared completely afterwards. Yeah, sometimes in mysterious circumstances. People used to say, I wonder what happened to Harry Worthington. Folks said, yeah, maybe he'd done a job with Tom Baker. Because that can be the kiss of death.
When you were the star of the show, and so how was it for you to have these guest artists coming in each week? I mean, could you kind of recall all the stories? I mean, you were sort of going from one to another, and did it all get a bit mixed up?
Oh, yes, it did get a bit mixed up, but then, life is often very mixed up, and other people would guide me and put me right and everything. But we were very welcoming. There was a kind of unwritten house style, about how we welcomed actors. And they were very distinguished actors, and they knew as visiting actors that we were in it week by week, and so we knew exactly where we were.
Yeah.
And there was no competition. They were very welcome, and I think that's why people wanted to be in Doctor Who, really, not only just for a few quid and to be on the telly, but the word got out that it was fun to be on. Sometimes, of course, in the studio, because can be a bit bossy, because of their week after week after week, I would sometimes say to the director, look, we used that. I knew every shot in the TARDIS, It's like trying to give an actor in Coronation Street a tip about the inside of their house. We knew all the shots, and so if we were reasonably tactful, we could tell very obsessional directors like Dougie Camfield, who worried terribly about the details. We could tell him we'd shot that exactly like that. We knew all about that kind of wonderful thing, there were too many lines on a running shot, and so we used to do that wonderful old trick. Was we'd run about 15 feet, and I'd suddenly stop and say, shh. What did you say? And Elizabeth then would say these 7 lines. And I'd say, yes, yes. And then we'd move off because...
made it easier to say the lines,
it made it
not
easier,
on the move.
That's right, on the move. We did all sorts of things like that. It was the reason I stayed so long with Doctor Who was simply because most of it was absolute pleasure, And I was right. I made 1 or 2 good decisions in my life. And that was one of them. And the proof of that I was right is that here we are, nearly 30 years after I finished with it, never mind these stories, 30 years after I finished nearly, I'm being met, or, I could spend 2 days a week going to some sort of event, which is a celebration of Doctor Who, because lots and lots of people, thank God, hundreds of thousands of them all around the world, have never left Doctor Who. They won't leave it, as we won't leave our childhood. We have to move on and do other things, but it's there, those certainties and pleasures of childhood. People say, somebody stopped me once in Oxford Street and said, just before he got to me, I had Tom Baker, and I looked at this young man, and sometimes I say to people, in order to get past that kind of, I often say, have we worked together? And they say, oh, no, but I'm a fan. I say, oh, good, and off I go. And I said to this guy, have we, and he said, no. He stopped me speaking, and he said, when I was a boy, Mr. Baker, he said, I was in Care in North Wales, a terrible place. It was terrible. And nobody, I think, wanted us, really. And on Saturday nights, you made life better. And before I could speak, he couldn't speak anymore. He couldn't speak, and he just tapped me, and he was gone, Yeah. And the effort to make a sweet, generous little speech like that in the middle of Oxford Street, I thought, yeah, that was good. We, some good things we did that we didn't know about. We didn't know about that.
That's right, the power of the character.
That they identified with. It was wonderful.
Tom, talking of the actors in the show, do you remember working with John Bennett on this one? He played the Chinese conjurer Li Sen Chang, I think.
Yes. Yeah, John Bennett, I'd worked with him on a BBC show called Honey Lane. He had a big lead in that. That was a long time, awful long time.
You'd worked on Honey Lane?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
I started my career at ATV, and Honey Lane was written by Louis Marks.
That's right, and
who
script
did
editor
The Mask of Mandragora, and I was a trainee script editor.
Yeah,
then.
and I think the assistant script editor was Brian Rawlinson, who was an actor as well.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I was in Honey Lane.
That's interesting.
And John, of course, was a wonderful naturalistic actor, marvellous. I also knew him at Bristol when I was at the rep there. Yes, no one could do sinister. Like, he was very still, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And exquisite, yeah. He had a nice line in cutting put-downs, yeah.
He'd been the romantic lead in the Forsyte saga, hadn't he?
Yeah, when he was young, he was prodigiously handsome.
Yes.
Luminous, great luminous eyes, and a very sensitive mouth, you know. But dangerous as well. There was a kind of menace to
That's
it,
right,
which I imagine girls found irresistible.
What did you think of the depiction of the Chinese in the show? Because maybe we wouldn't get away with it these days.
No, I mean, I don't know. That's right, because I mean, I suppose there are real Chinese people, and then there are fictional Chinese people, you know. And in fiction, isn't it? You know, people.
Well, particularly that era, that's Sax
right.
Roma kind of
That
Limehouse sort of.
Sax Roma is a very good example of it. Yeah, all those Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
No, and the villains were always Chinese, weren't they?
Yeah.
And opium dens
Yes.
and.
Well, we sort of filched all that, really, didn't we?
Well, we did,
For the
yes,
story.
because of course we actually, of course, were running the opium into China anyway at the time. So I mean, we were the big dealers in drugs, and yet we blame it in fiction on the Chinese. But yeah, it was odd. It was marvelous. I still read Sherlock Holmes. You know, I don't read Sax Rohmer anymore. I don't think he's a good enough writer. But Holmes, I love all that kind of London underground and the suggestion of evil. And,
This formula we had of the sort of historical dramas like Mask of Mandragora and Talons of Weng-Chiang and the Pyramids of Mars, they have proved to be incredibly popular. There was something about that mixture of going back a little bit in history and tying it in with the sort of formula of the show that seemed to work really well.
I think so, and also the artifacts of that time are still familiar to us, aren't they? Because of fiction and films and everything like that. I mean, when you go too far back in time, or when you go too far into the future, one of the difficulties about science fantasy or science fiction, for that matter, is the artifacts are much more difficult to describe.
They are, that's right.
And also, they're not all that interesting.
No. Well,
to
they
look
couldn't be
at.
those interesting. In our day, we couldn't make them that interesting because there wasn't, the digital graphics in the way they have now in movies. So
Yeah, I don't
we
know
had to
whether-
make them.
Yeah, but when you look at the launching rockets into space now, it's just a bigger version of Doctor Who. It's all those great technicians looking at thousands of screens, you know, and then suddenly shouting, "We have takeoff," and they all clap, and you think, wow, they still do that. I think. I mean, I haven't been there, but I mean, I see it occasionally on the news.
Were you very aware of the designers on the show? You know, like Roger Murray Leach, for example, did the design and designed a lot of shows that you and I worked together on. John Bloomfield did the costumes. I mean, how much did you personally sort of have a relationship, working on the show with them? How important were they to
Well,
you?
I mean, John Bloomfield, of course, I think I'd known him because he was the what do you call the authority? I think he designed the military costumes for Nicholas and Alexandra in '69 or something. So I knew of him there, and he did me proud on one or two shows, especially this one.
Did you want to look like Sherlock Holmes, or did he
No,
suggest
I think
it?
I saw the drawings and could see which way he was going, you know, and then he made me those wonderful overcoats, you know. It was a Doctor Who dressed as a Sherlock Holmes. I didn't have a pipe or anything like that. I played a violin. As for Roger Murray Leach, of course, he became a kind of buddy really because he was young and he was very enthusiastic about it, wasn't he? What was the one he did which was in a circle? Ian Marter was in it.
Oh, The Ark in Space. The first one
Yeah.
that I did. And there's the first Doctor Who that he designed because he'd been doing light entertainment shows.
Yeah.
And once I discovered him and David Maloney, I sort of tried to keep them together
Yes.
as a team.
But the Ark in Space was wonderful,
Yeah,
wasn't
it was
That
very
whole
unusual
thing
for the
on a
time,
circle,
yeah.
It was absolutely great.
Yeah.
And he also was intensely theatrical. I mean, he loved talking about outrageous things, you know, actors who were outrageously good or outrageously bad. And he travelled a lot.
Yeah.
And he was shrewd.
That's right. He brought something extra.
Yeah, he'd
to
been
the show,
somewhere else. Yeah, he used to grow bean shoots in Australia in an old warehouse he had. Yeah, and he ran a canning factory. And he also, of course, was a qualified architect.
That's right, yeah.
But he'd gone into show business. Ha! Yeah. I've got his email. I'll email to him today and say we were thinking about him. Yeah. He had a very tall wife.
She was an ex-bluebell. Perhaps we shouldn't say this.
Yeah. Boy, she was amazing. Yeah. Amazing looking girl, yeah. I think we better stop there.
Yeah, I think so. We're getting into dangerous territory.